All right, good morning. Welcome to our official return to cannabis events. It's been a year for us, so it's really glad to see you people all showing back up and returning. A lot of familiar faces I haven't seen in about a year. Obviously, we're still in COVID times, and so what you're seeing today is a smaller, safer, more distant event, but for those of you that turned out, we really do appreciate it. It's been a long time for us as an organization that does live events. And so with that, we're pleased to bring you back our 5th annual Cannabis Lab Conference and Expo here at Wynwood, safer and smaller. Normally this is a 2-day event with tons of education. We really pared it down today. But what's great and special about it is this is normally a national conference, and so we're bringing in people from everywhere and anywhere. This one's really more home-based. And so a lot of the panelists and speakers you're going to see today are guys who have been with us since the start. They're our nearest and dearest, our best and brightest. They've been helping us as an organization grow. So in addition to bringing back a conference, we're also able to, one, reconnect with our friends and our familiar faces, but really shine a light on the people that have helped us as an organization. And so we really do appreciate what we are as an organization is a group of resources. And the resources we bring to you are the people behind me, the lawyers, the insurance guys, the compliance guys, that really know what's going on, that are really helping to move this industry forward, that are also here to educate you today. And so we're going to kick things off really quickly here. We want to get going. Our first panel today is the future of compliance. We have a brilliant panel behind us. I'm going to hand it over to Gerstein from Akerman, who's going to moderate and head this panel for you. So without further ado, Ari, thank you for getting us going again.
Yes, good morning everyone. My name is Gerstein. Again, I'm a partner with Akerman Law Firm. I'm based in Akerman's Miami office. We have 22 offices throughout the country. We're one of the first large law firms to handle cannabis and hemp matters. So I'm here today with a great panel. Thank you very much to Robert and the Sacred Space for hosting us today. I'm glad to see you guys could all see some familiar faces, and I'm glad to see everyone was able to make it out today in a distance manner. I think we'll start off by introducing our panel. David, if you want to start.
Hi, good morning. My name is David Rahn. I'm Vice President of Account Services at S2S Insurance Specialists. We are an insurance brokerage firm specializing in the cannabis, hemp, CBD, and psychedelic industries. We provide coverage products for the insurance for your business from everywhere in the supply chain, from seed to sale. We provide everything from directors and officers insurance all the way up to property and casualty products. On top of, we also deal with captive insurance products and parametric insurance technologies.
Great.
Morning, everybody. My name is Daniel Sparks. I work in the legal and compliance department with Trulieve.
Good morning, my name is Michael Williamson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Panelists BC. We're a global consulting firm specializing in everything from breaking unrealistic pro formas to design assist both for architectural and engineering purposes, specializing in large scale, so upwards to 1.5 million square feet of canopy. We've worked in Canada, Europe, Colombia, and all throughout the States. I'm also the Director of Cultivation for a company called PIP Horticulture. PIP Horticulture specializes in multi-tiered mobile storage solutions. So if you've seen a lot of the newer grow facilities go from single-level HPS to multi-tiered LED, we're the company that kind of pioneered a lot of that technology in the early patents there. And been assisting existing operators and new operators since 2009.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Kohner. I'm the president and CEO of Easy Green Compliance. We are a HIPAA-compliant point of sale, and that software business gives me the chance to travel all over the country and the world to look at different municipalities, countries, and states that are rolling out their cannabis programs. So I see a lot of challenges and folks that have worked out some of the solutions in supply chains, which I find interesting. And today I'm sitting here, I'm on the advisory board of ACS Laboratory, located in Sun City, Florida. They are the largest hemp testing lab in the United States. They've got over 1,000 clients in 49 states, and they test about 60 to 70% of all the THC cannabis in the state of Florida. They have a life sciences team that develops specific SOPs for each of the physical products and each of the physical tests. And I'm really glad to be here and meet everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. As you can see, we really have a great panel today with all different aspects of the compliance in the regulated industry. The first question I want to ask is the culture of compliance and seeing a red flag. Those are two opposite ends. You're either on the side of seeing that from a customer or seeing that from an employer, but each of you seem to be in a position where you have the ability to observe a culture of compliance or the ability to observe red flags, whether you're either onboarding a new customer, evaluating an opportunity, or possibly remedying a problem. Daniel, if I could start with you, what does it mean to have a culture of compliance, and how do you avoid drawing red flags?
That's a great question. So how do you create a culture of compliance in a full vertical in the state of Florida, because that's the experience that I have anyway, is through buy-in. It's through physical presence, physically being at the cultivation, the point of cultivation, the point of manufacturing, physically being in our stores, in our dispensaries, our dispensing facilities, and leading by example, right? So not just providing a checklist and saying follow this checklist, but actually demonstrating, training, retraining if necessary, and showing each employee based on their scope of work how to comply with the law.
Okay, now Mike, if I could switch gears to you. When you're speaking with a client and you happen to possibly notice an issue with compliance or a red flag, is that a difficult topic to broach with a potential client? Is that something that you bring out right in front, or you avoid clients that have those kinds of issues, or is that something that you find often that has to be remedied on a regular basis?
I mean, with compliance infractions, there's no like brushing it under the rug or avoidance. I think anytime that you see something in the field, whether it's your own operation or in my case, maybe a partner's operation, it's something that you bring to the attention right away. At the end of the day, transparency is the best kind of philosophy there. As I've worked in many emerging states, especially in emerging states, and you have an opportunity, there's usually kind of two general client practices. One is, I'm going to do the bare minimum not to get in trouble, because I'm so busy and everything's on fire and I'm not managing all these other aspects of my business. And the truth is a lot of people, compliance isn't the sexiest or most romantic part of the business for a lot of people, and so compliance has to fall on everybody. Everybody, you mentioned buy-in, and that's culture too. Culture is a really important thing to establish, and it's kind of difficult to do after the fact. So if you can start with your culture early on as a smaller company, all these companies that are very successful go through some version of what I call hyper-growth. And hyper-growth is where things slip through the cracks. So we had a Canadian client, they went from 180 employees, and 9 months later, we scaled up to 1 million square feet of greenhouse, and they had 700 employees. So they went through this hyper-growth stage. You mentioned retraining. We talk about training and SOPs, all that stuff. I find that SOPs for a lot of people is it like a dusty book on the shelf that they maybe read once. It's like an employee handbook. I mean, I would say 80 to 90% of employees don't actually read their employee handbook. And then they come to HR and ask all these questions about, well, what happens with this? And it's like, well, it's in your handbook. Well, I never read it, but I signed it. So constantly in terms of training and culture, it's retraining. It's creating tests for those trainings. It's getting people to put their name and sign their name. There's something very powerful about after you've received training, whether it's compliance or operational, and the two are pretty much the same. Anytime we do something operationally, there's generally this invisible sheet of compliance. So after a compliance training or an operational process training, having everybody sign that sheet, and there's something about that accountability there, and you're like, you didn't understand it, well, your signature's here. But then people also settle with one training and thinking that's enough, especially in a hyper-growth stage. You want potentially monthly trainings for a little while, or quarterly trainings. You have to really drive it home. And on the accountability side and kind of leading by example, the worst thing ever is when you finally get the people to buy in that are your workers, and you have certain executive staff that cruises through and like abuses or doesn't follow any of the rules. So culture is something that I find is built best when I teach people not what to do, but why it matters for the supply chain and why it's important for their job. And then all of a sudden there's this wave of empowerment. And that's when culture starts to build and mutual accountability it gets put into place.
Okay. Now, Michael, the other Michael, you're somewhat at the junction point of where the rubber meets the road somewhat. Being in the testing field,
Yeah.
if something is not compliant, it's either black or white, it would seem. How do you see yourself in having to interface with customers and with regulators in terms of, well, we might have an issue here. You have a paying customer on one side, the other, you have the regulator on the other side. How do you put yourself in that position? And is that something that your customers are comfortable with? You might have to take a firm line on certain things.
I'm not always comfortable with it. So the key to picking somebody that's going to do third-party testing to protect your business and protect your license is integrity and that brand that brand comfort. So sometimes we find somebody does a test and they don't like the results, and because in the state of Florida it's vertically integrated, so it's critical for the team that's getting those tests to quickly get those COAs published so that they are fixed to the final consumer products and sold throughout the stores. So if you get a bad result, it's very hard to, if I'm the licensee, to think about slowing down my supply chain because we have to restock those shelves. But if you do it too quickly and you don't publish the correct COAs, or you go to a lab that will give you the results that you want, the long-term risk is there could be a recall, somebody could get sick. But the reality is we're in a market where the regulators the industry is growing and they're learning because it's new. So the regulators aren't coming in and clobbering people yet. So once somebody gets a really steep fine or they go after an employee for something, I feel that it will matter more. But from our perspective, the COA is the COA. You can absolutely get it retested. There's potency, there's full panel, but there's also education on those tests. And what we try to do is educate our clients and with the COA and understanding and breaking it down, because it's actually a selling tool if you're in the retail space and you can explain to the customer not just what the safety levels are, or there's no metal in something, but also the flavonoids and the terpenes that actually can help with, which in the state of Florida, it's a medical market, so there are actual benefits to the consumers taking certain products for their own purposes.
All right, and now the insurance guy. David, it's hard enough to get property insurance in Florida. What are you looking for? What are the companies looking for to underwrite cannabis companies? And in terms of compliance, I would believe that you're almost like the initial underwriter.
Yes.
And you kind of know basically what's accepted and what's not accepted, and what are the issues right now?
Absolutely, especially in the state of Florida, or throughout North America, USA and Canada. You do see some of these problems with writing property insurance. I mean, I see property insurance in Canada, I see property insurance in the United States. A lot of the times, it is a lot of hand-holding with your clients, making sure that they make the right moves at the right time to make sure that they give the appropriate coverage, especially your property coverage and also general liability coverage. Let's say you're renting a space from your landlord. Contractually, with every lease agreement, there is an insurance clause. Sometimes that you have to have insurance, and sometimes a lot of these companies, a lot of these cannabis companies or a lot of these CBD companies, have a very strong entrepreneurial spirit, but don't have a lot of, knowledge and background information about the industry, and just buy expensive pieces of paper that cover nothing. So you really need to have, knowledge, communication, transparency. It's a very powerful cocktail, compliance. And you need to figure it out. And sometimes you really do need to have somebody like your lawyer or your general counsel, your accountant, or your insurance broker to really hold your hand and to really navigate the client through these difficult compliance measures.
Yeah, it sounds somewhat like folks years ago that were somewhat misrepresenting the type of products that they were selling via credit card.
Absolutely.
And they were miscoding the merchants as stationary stores or something like that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that had serious repercussions for those merchants and those individuals involved. But it was something that was widely done throughout the country.
With SIC codes, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a very big issue.
It is.
Now we've got a pretty nice crowd here, and we're the first panel of the day. But compliance isn't always the most exciting or sexy, like has been mentioned on this panel. Maybe each of you can provide a little insight on how you could change that. I mean, I know that some of the MMTCs, at least in Florida, might have thousands of employees right now, and it's something that is really everyone's responsibility. But how do we get from the most boring subject in the world to, hey, this is really important, this is what keeps us going, this is what keeps patients healthy, and this is what we need to do. Who'd like to start? Okay.
So for me, it's really about knowing your audience. And so if you have employees that, let's say, are over 40 and you want to give them the compliance manual, they may read it. But if you've got millennials that you're working with, they don't want to read the manual. So you need to make short videos to show them how it relates to their job. And that's the first phase of teaching compliance. The second phase is, how does it relate to sales? And giving them a training course around what are the benefits of the actual products, and looking at the images and training people on the COA and showing somebody who's an older adult that comes in and takes out their smartphone and scans the back of that package and gets to read up on what that actually is derived from. That's really empowering, and that's going to make people feel better because everybody can now do research through the internet. So I think that those two pieces are the easiest way to translate compliance, not just to employees, but pass that information along to the consumers.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of hourly employees at dispensaries, a lot of turnover. Yep. Some are paid at minimum wage, so it is difficult to engage. Can anyone else provide some insight as to how that might be a topic that can be overcome?
Yeah, especially from somebody who does, work both in and out of the state of Florida, I really do see, hopefully, other states adopting best practices from other states, more established states like the Pacific Northwest or more the West Coast and the mountain states that have had both medical and adult use programs for, almost close to 5 years now. And they have they're more well established than the state of Florida or the state of Illinois or the state of Michigan. And they have some better practices that these states could adopt and not only become a little bit more compliant, but also a little bit more efficient as well. But that also it's a long game because with, changing policy and changing legislation and changing, state legislature, it's very much a long game, which is compliance, yeah.
Certainly, and as you mentioned, there recently was a group assembled of many of the state legislators who are from states that have legalized cannabis products. They have joined together almost like the NAIC for insurance commissioners, right, to talk about having uniform state laws and model laws that they can adopt. And I feel that's a big possible step forward as having these model laws, because there have been some successes and some might say failures like Florida, where the laws just aren't sufficiently developed as the industry is.
Right. And you got to really, at the end of the day, you really have to cut down a lot of these branches when you're trying to make yourself through this thick, dense forest that is compliance. You need a good machete, if you will.
Now, if I could ask Daniel a little bit more of a question, how do you mitigate this risk when you're the largest MMTC in Florida, with everyone having their eyes on you, looking to say, hey, that's what Trulieve is doing?
So this reminds me of something that somebody told me a long time ago, and it's regarding relationships. And it's a pretty blanket statement, and you can apply it to anything. So the statement is, there's two keys to any relationship. Period. Absence and presence. The absence part is the trust, but the presence part is establishing that trust. So that's my answer. Establishing relationships of trust and empowering people to do their job.
So largely empowerment, is that what you're saying? I mean, because you are so spread out throughout the state.
Mike brought up a great point regarding the why. So we're a highly regulated industry in the state of Florida and elsewhere, right? We are treated akin to a pharmacy for a reason, right? We're distributing medicine to patients. So regardless of whether it's full vertical or not, we are a medical provider regulated by the Department of Health, issuing medicine to patients. So the why is incredibly important across the supply chain, from cultivation, manufacturing, all the way to the dispensary experience. And that why is very broad and very deep. So back to my first statement, it's being present, being at the point of instructing people and giving them the why as to how that impacts the entire operation, the license, right? The license of the operator, and the safety of the products that are being consumed by patients across the state. So the why is very important.
Now, one of the things that's still evolving in the cannabis industry are standards. There aren't necessarily uniform standards throughout the state. There aren't necessarily scientific standards that always apply. There aren't necessarily scientific bodies that want their standards to be applied to the cannabis industry. Would anyone like to comment on where they see that going and how they see that changing the industry as we move closer and closer towards potential nationwide, either medical or recreational legalization? We've seen it with hemp, but do you guys see the standards boards evolving to address cannabis issues, or do you see independent scientific and standards boards being developed just to address the cannabis industry? Do you see it as a new sort of culture or an existing culture that's going to mature? Anyone like to address that?
So I'd like to say that one. So there's one worldwide standard right now in cannabis, and it's ASTM, American Society for Testing and Material, D37.05. And I encourage everybody to look it up and get comfortable and see what they're doing, because they are giving the states in the United States a third-party reference and kind of like case law for a bunch of attorneys trying to write for concepts that they've never experienced before. So if you look at like to your point, someone said about the Pac Northwest, that market. So if somebody's trying to roll out recreational packaging on the East Coast, and they're a 26-year-old attorney working for the state in the cannabis compliance program, and they don't know how to approach that, there are some great regulators that have already done that on the left coast, but they have no way to communicate. So looking to third-party organizations like ASTM is a great way for them to get some case law and some experience to roll things out and avoid some of the pitfalls and speed bumps that other folks had gone through ahead of them. And that's the answer. And then eventually the federal regulations will trickle down. And I'm also a strong believer that this is medicine, and that they will use the SOPs based on pharmaceutical dispensing from a prescription and OTG over-the-counter methodologies. And I think that's where this is going to go, but we need the feds to adopt that for it to happen. So we're trying to mirror those best practices as we go.
Mm-hmm. Similar to an issue, I guess, with organic certification and organic farming.
Sure.
How that's not technically available, I guess, officially for cannabis yet, because we haven't yet caught up to normal agriculture. The next question I have, Mike, I was wondering, how do you see technology influencing the advancement of compliance, and do you see that as affecting the role of the compliance officer in the marijuana?
Massively, especially, Canada and some of the European GMP models that we see, particularly the Canadians, just because they had so much capital to deploy a few years ago. I mean, to the point where we were at facilities where autonomous trains or trolleys are actually bringing product from the greenhouse into the system. Everything is automated. I mean, high levels of automation. There's pros and cons to that, of course, but now you're starting to see compliance get integrated where you're not physically weighing every single plant physically from a wet weight standpoint. It's now integrated into a conveyor type scale system. Same thing with waste. So I think you're going to see there's a lot of bottlenecks with compliance. A lot of people don't realize, they're like, oh, operationally, I can crank out 10,000 packages of gummies. The time-consuming part is the batch-specific labeling, and so there's all these bottlenecks that are starting to be alleviated with high levels of automation. The good thing about doing everything manually or semi-automated at first is this big automation, when it goes down, it goes down. So you need to be able to pivot back over, because as we were talking earlier, like the retail doesn't care about what's happening over here. There's just this mouth to feed, and so but we are seeing that there's certain technologies. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with like GeoShepherd. Is that something that's come across your radar at all? GeoShepherd is a tool that helps people with wet weights and reducing the amount of time to take a wet weight. And once you get people on it, they're like, oh my God, this freed up so much time. And this also falls into other issues. So when you have a physical process or compliance that is just so taxing from a time standpoint, now other components of regulatory and compliance may slip because you get hyper-focused on this particular bottleneck or kink in the supply chain, and now maybe your quality control component to compliance isn't there.
So I think, does that leave an opportunity for some of the smaller players who don't want to be the big automated behemoths in the industry to kind of fall into this little bit of a curated market, I guess, for their small batches or their small sorts of product lines?
Absolutely. I mean, in my opinion, there's not enough high-quality craft cannabis on the market. Everyone has a different version of what they consider connoisseur flower or, craft cannabis. And new consumers in new emerging markets, they're just excited that there's a program. So it doesn't really matter what you produce. We work in some states where the owner's like, it doesn't matter what you grow, what it smells like, I just need the yield numbers to be X, Y, Z for my evaluation. And that's a very true statement. But as these states mature, the average consumer becomes more selective. And once you kind of get a taste for high quality, you have this like aha moment. For the last 2 years, everything I've put into my body is kind of garbagey. And so you're seeing new consumers evolve a lot at a much faster rate than we did in, let's say, 2009 or 2012, where things were just so rocky. But now you have such elevated products coming to the market, and people are interested in new stuff. And so call it the evolving consumer. But now they're ramping up. And there's always going to be somebody that wants something economical, a safe product at a quality price. There's kind of the middle zone, which is scary. The mid shelf, if you will, on California or anywhere is a scary place to be because
It's difficult.
like 70% of the brands fall into this mid shelf. They're not ultra high quality, fetching a premium, and they're not like the working class, economical buy.
Right.
So we call that the dead man zone. It's a scary place to be. So you kind of either want to target both or all three, but you got to be careful on.
Starting out, it seems hard to avoid the middle.
It can be.
So, I think a lot of companies in Florida might somewhat be trapped trying to get out of that middle zone right
Sure.
now, struggling because they are fully vertically integrated. They have such large grow facilities, and if there's a bug or a mold or some kind of other problem, they're down.
Well,
for a
you're seeing
while.
people split up their infrastructure as well. They're saying, okay, hey, I'm going to build 5 acres, 10 acres of Venlo-style
Sure.
glass greenhouse. We're going to put 50% of that to extracted products, and we're going to have some of that be working class.
Sure.
And we're also building this state-of-the-art indoor climate-controlled facility, especially in a state like Florida, where seasonal weather can impact the crop dramatically. And that would be more geared towards like a higher quality or
Sure.
connoisseur, higher price brand.
Right. Well, at this point now, unfortunately, it's just getting any space. It seems, there's not enough space for that differentiation for a lot of companies because they have almost no grow space at all. They can't keep up with demand.
Yep.
Very challenging. David, I wanted to ask you, when you're handling insurance, are technological means a new piece of underwriting? We see in car insurance and other aspects of insurance where they're looking at a driver's record, they want you to plug in something into your car to see how fast you're driving. Are there any sort of metrics that cannabis insurers are looking at to see, hey, you have your fire prevention set on a timer, you have your lights set on certain timers? Are there any things like that out yet? Are they evolving? Or?
So yes, they are out. They are evolving, and there's always something new coming out every single day. I know of a company based in Florida. I forget their name off the top of my head. But I know that with indoor grow facilities, they are using specialized cameras to monitor any sort of plant defects or any sort of plant damage that might happen during the grow. So they can see that damage, they can remove that plant from the batch, and hopefully that won't cause any sort of claims trigger.
Mm-hmm. So like another partner another partner basically to mitigate the risk. The insurer, I guess, wants to be on board.
And it's a manless third party, so it's very cost effective as well.
Is that Farm Vision?
I think it's like Emerald Scientific or something?
Yeah, there's a few.
Yeah.
There's a lot of happening with HD cameras in the cultivation space.
Yes.
Identifying deficiencies early, identifying pests early,
Yes.
geotagging pest locations in bigger facilities. So traditionally we had scouts, and we still have scouts. They physically rove these acreage, and they're looking for hot spots, they're counting plants. Now you can send a drone over, it geotags, hey, there's a hot spot of two-spotted or spider mite or whatever it might be, and then another drone will come and deploy the beneficial bugs right on that same spot. And now you're taking all this human element out of it, and more importantly, you're reacting to a problem before it's a problem. Usually with humans, it's like, oh, there's a lot of webs on this one, and by that time, it's like, it's too late. So we're seeing that technology is speeding up our ability to react to the plant and its many demanding needs.
Dialing it in.
Yeah.
Would anyone like to comment on the best practices for remediation, for retraining when there is an incident, there is an issue where an inspector has come and receipts weren't issued at the dispensary or a package was given without the proper label on it, and there is a real issue, the department's wanting a response back. How do we retrain without alienating employees and the people that are working hard on the front line after there's been a sale for 50% off and there's been thousands of customers that one day, and the one transaction that didn't have the label on it is the one transaction that's the subject of a letter. Does anyone want to comment on that?
I think the only comment that I could really give at this point in time is that the keystone for that sort of situation is communication. Communication, communication, communication. Communication within your staff, within your company, communication within your outside legal department, and also communication with your insurance broker. Because they all need to know what's going on with these compliance measures or compliance infractions in case there needs to be a claim to be filed, in case there needs to be a suit that needs to be brought on, and then the insurance needs to come in and pay for the legal defense. So it's all about communication, in my eyes.
Right, no, that's a very important issue because while we might want to sweep some of those things under the rug,
Right.
to the extent we don't alert the insurance company or to the extent we don't alert counsel, there could be a real issue down the
You
road.
really need to herd your elephants at that point in time.
Right, I mean, once we do have something formal in place out there, a letter, a written correspondence, that is a very good point that you don't want to waive
Yeah.
any sort of rights that you might have for recovery to remediate whatever significant problem you might have.
And passing all that pertinent knowledge through that communication.
Yes, yes.
Capstone.
Would anyone else like to address that subject on how to avoid alienating and I guess bringing on as fans employees who are somewhat overworked and might be being paid minimum wage, somewhat difficult to motivate? Does anyone have any suggestions and tips on how to address compliance issues that come up that are significant and could really be issues for the business operation?
Compassionately. To do so compassionately. Last year was one of the most difficult years for everybody, period, whether you're in the cannabis industry or not. And compassion for our frontline workers, right, that are providing assistance, medical assistance in all different forms, right, are under a lot of stress. And that includes, the Office of Medical Marijuana Use and their inspectors. They're very much physically in the dispensaries, inspecting, running audits, so on and so forth. So I think compassion and communication are two cornerstones of compliance in general.
One related topic I guess we could probably address as we wrap this up is how do you see COVID, the experience that we've had over the past year that's been dramatic. There have been so many changes. Cannabis companies have been deemed essential. Delivery is skyrocketing. Purchases are skyrocketing. How do you see the industry changed going forward, not turning back because of COVID? What do you see that this experience has done for both the patients and for your businesses that you consult with? How has this changed you and made you better? If you could each weigh in on that, I would definitely appreciate it.
So I would say that COVID actually benefited the cannabis industry because it was deemed essential in different markets, different states across the country. Those regulators released their grip by not issuing certain laws and saying you can do this but you can't do that. They wouldn't say, so operators would be kind of stuck. So as soon as it was deemed necessary business, they said not only do we want you to stay open, but we are going to allow you to use technology to grow your business and scale. So if you can mitigate the risk of human contamination with COVID with home delivery applications, they just let all the restrictions go and said integrate the point of sale and get people these essential products. And so that catapulted the revenue in 2020 to make up for what happened in 2019, and I think it's going to continue to do so. and technology will lead the way. And the other thing I think about technology, in a lot of states that are going to issue licenses for the recreational market, and they want to do the point system to help people that were in lower socioeconomic zip codes that were affected by the war on drugs, if they're given a license and they don't have the proper training or SOPs, they will lose that license. So by automation and giving them checks and balances through compliance, they have a fighting chance to maintain that license and make a living off of that, as all the big corporations came in and got the vertical integration licenses that they really couldn't compete for.
I see compliance, especially in this day and age, both becoming a non-human element with technology and a human element that still monitors that technology and makes sure that everything is running correctly. And by that, because with the non-human element, we're seeing a lot more social distancing. We're seeing contact delivery, contact pickup, things like that. That's going to play more of a part. All those things that happened in the background are still going to be checked, but might be checked by somebody that's not a human, and that's something that's totally trained into compliance, whatever that may be.
Yeah, COVID was a wake-up call in a lot of ways. I think that it exposed a lot of inefficiencies. It exposed priorities, right? As it relates to the cannabis industry in Florida in particular, there was more of a push for contactless exchange, curbside pickup, deliveries went up for a while, but the reality is that people want the human element when it comes to, certain interactions, certain transactions, right? So that being said, I think that technology will play a bigger part in our everyday lives. That the fact that the speed at which technology will become involved was expedited greatly by COVID. Again, exposing inefficiencies and rearranging priorities. So I really just think that COVID expedited that process. It was happening already. You could say that there was less of a push for brick and mortar retail for certain purchases, and more online ordering. Obviously, Amazon has completely changed the way that we purchase certain goods over the past year, or at least expedited that online ordering process. So, yeah.
I've seen so many improvements with COVID. I know we talk about a lot of the bad stuff, but I've seen a lot of great things too. I think sanitation in general, I'm kind of a germaphobe pre-COVID, so everything from airplanes to these cultivation facilities have improved upon. One of the challenges is watching all this PPE stuff just get wasted. It's very much the GMP Canadian European model, but now we're seeing it here in the States. With my background in lean manufacturing, I've always been focused on bringing the work to the workers, and now I'm seeing people transition to that mentality a little bit more, because now you can bring things to people on conveyor belts in a centralized location, or head house as an example. You can stagger people along a line, socially distant. You're watching people. Also, everyone had all their staff on site in a lot of these places, and you've had staff everywhere, and staff in trailers, and staff on top of each other. Well, now we say, well, Anne's 75 years old, the accountant, does she really need to be here? Is it safe for her to be here? Or can Anne do her job from home? So I watched a big shift of non-on-site for cultivation purposes, and maybe even retail as well, where they're saying, no, this portion can work from home and we do it just as efficient. But overall, it's an ever-changing landscape. I think my closing comments on compliance are 99 is not 100. You're either 100% compliant or you're not. And compliance is one of those areas, it's one of the few areas actually, where you can make a mistake and you can jeopardize the entire business and every single job there. So empowerment's a big one, like we talked about. I'm always asking why. Why do we do something? How does this add value to the end user? And if I can't get to the answer of that with 5 whys or however many, then I question why we do it. And so I think a lot of people, once we got over that, I don't know, whenever it was about April, May, June, when people kind of started to stop focusing on so much in the media and focus kind of at home, so to speak, people took a lot of time to kind of clean up their house a bit and rearrange some things. Like there's like a lot of renovations happening right now in the cannabis space. So I think it was a good time for people to kind of get scattered, but then have to kind of laser focus on how to do better in 2021. And, you know, cannabis is essential. That's really clear. So I think it's been really motivating for people. And there's a lot of people that maybe were working an hourly or minimum wage job, and their friends who also have minimum wage jobs lost their jobs in restaurants or somewhere else. And now all of a sudden, this worker that was maybe dreading going to work every day, and the truth is new workers in the cannabis space, they are so excited. It's like the honeymoon stage. It's very romantic. And then you get into it and you're like, oh, I got to do 10,000 pre-rolls per day. And all of a sudden you realize that you actually took a job in manufacturing, and it's not that romantic, and you know it is monotonous. But now all of a sudden your job's essential. You're at work. Your paycheck is good. You're being recognized. There's so many little things you can do with your employees, for those of you that are owner-operators, that don't involve money. So one of the questions I ask in interviews is, how do you like to be rewarded? The only person that ever says money is the grower. Everyone else, the number one answer is recognition. So it starts at the top and it works its way down. Take the time. The leaders up top, they also don't get trained in compliance either. That's another mistake I see. They force all this compliance on these ground floor operators, but yet the leadership, the CFO, the COO, they haven't gone through any major compliance training. So it starts there because they have to be held accountable. They need to be able to walk through a place, call something out as, hey, that's not spec. We do programs that are about recognizing people. One of them I really like that you guys can steal if you like it. It's called Props. Props is peers recognizing other peers. So we do incentive programs where you can put an email in once a month and you say, hey, I saw Jane, she was crushing it on whatever task she was doing. She went above and beyond with a customer at the retail level. I want to nominate her for Props of the Month. And Props of the Month, are you going to get a big paycheck? No, but maybe you get like a premium parking spot in the dead of summer for a month. These little tiny things that you can do where you acknowledge people and they get their name on a screen somewhere that floats around your business. So there's all these little meaningful things that you can do that touch people that make them work 250 times harder for you than they would before. And now they're driving to work, feeling empowered, excited to go to work, and it's not just another job.
I think empowerment's the big message here. I think that's what's taking away, is to really motivate someone and to motivate people to stay with that culture of compliance. Really, empowerment is what is necessary because you have so many disparate employees doing all kinds of different tasks at all kinds of different skill levels. And compliance, again, is a lot of times just words in a book or words in a manual. And I think you made a good point, is that 99 is not 100. And that's, that one other percentage point is like the bad social media post that the CEO made. That just
you don't get in trouble for being 110% compliance. You know, I've been told lots of times on new startups, especially in new states, they're like, "Oh, you guys are way over compliant," and I'm like, "Thank you." You know, but then all of a sudden, now you are the shining light of how something should be. So then you get invited to be on advisory panels, rulemaking committees, and now you're guiding things and shaping things in a positive light. Also, while regulators are going to another facility and they're throwing their hands up in the air and saying, "Oh, it can't be done," and this, that, and the other, and they got all these excuses, then they say, "Well,
you're doing it."
Michael over at Harborside, they have no problem with this, or whatever company.
Great point. Lead by example. Great point. Are there any questions that we can answer? We have about 5 more minutes to go. If anyone has anything that they'd like to. Well, and let me just add, this is probably going to be a recurring subject as to almost any sort of role in the cannabis industry. There are going to be all kinds of people selling cards and certifications.
Continuous education. It's not just about receiving one certificate and saying, I got this thing from Oaksterdam University and I'm a master of blah, blah, blah. It's ongoing. I mean, I've got 3,000 licensed tracked harvests under my belt. I've never had a perfect harvest. I'm always trying to be better than the harvest from before. And it's this Kaizen, continuous improvement mentality. And that falls into SOPs. It falls into compliance. It's like, how do we do this better? How do we do this faster without cutting corners or jeopardizing safety? So in simple answer, I think, yes, it's probably a great foundational class to take, but don't just settle on that as being, the last word, and keep layering it like a compliance lasagna, for lack of better words.
Right, that's more of like, the skills that are taught
Italian,
in
so
such a class would be helpful,
get that.
but not necessarily the certification that you get from it, it would seem.
If the
Because
hands hit it.
unfortunately, there isn't a national standard or even a local standard, really. It's constantly changing, but there are going to be those instances where it would be helpful to have outside entities. It's just really, what are they teaching? Is it all hype, or is it something actually worthwhile? Because there are certain skills that can be learned and need to be learned. I think we have time for one more.
How are you essentially deeming that they receive the information appropriately? I like to make tests. So if I give you a new training, then you're gonna have like a 3 to 5 question test. And if you can't pass the test, then I know I gotta retrain you. I'm gonna retrain you anyways, because retraining is the most important thing you can do in a business. But I see that a lot of people kind of like, it just gets brushed under the rug. It's like this inconvenience thing, like you have to take the time to make the time, and you will go faster if you slow down. It's like that slow is smooth and smooth is fast kind of principle. But people don't take the necessary time. They're like, I'm too busy. It's like, oh, you're too busy, but you're gonna put your whole business at risk and all the people around you?
Right, too busy is not really an option.
No.
Something like green flower or any
Course to an extent that's out there on the market is going to be like fundamentals, vernacular, nomenclature, things like that. I have seen some, I've actually seen a local FAU course, call it local, public college versus private company. Is FAU using green flower or utilizing green flower? Okay, so for nomenclature, definitions, things like that, that's important. But back to the FAU course, there's actually an owner-operator consultant out of California that I know personally who's teaching that course, or at least online, for the online component. So I would say that who is teaching, right? And what the scope that they're trying to, for what role or what scope they're instructing on is more important than, a certification or a certain school or whatever it is. It's the professor, right? It's the quality of the professor, the experience of the professor, as opposed to just, these are the terms that you need to know, or what actual operational knowledge and experience, I think is crucial.
And sometimes we overlook the basic terms that some folks might not be aware of, sativa, indica. People might be coming into the industry and not have any clue about what those things are, how things are measured, or anything like that. So we can't really discount 100% the basics, because it is a lot of times essential. We just take for granted that these sorts of terminologies will already be in use, but they aren't always.
It's a starting point.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a starting point. It's important to understand what the content is, and not necessarily what the card says that you received a certification of, or whatever it might be. We have time for probably one more question, if there is anyone else that's okay.
So with ancillary products in Canada, I'm seeing a high level of compliance testing required before the products even get into the facilities. And I have certain states I see in the U.S. that there's zero. So just wonder if anybody can comment on compliance in Canada versus the U.S. and where that's going.
I'm happy to take it. Yeah, it's a whole nother level in Canada. And I assume that you're talking about things like substrate quality control. It's a big issue, and people are like, oh, I don't know how we got these bugs in our facility. And it's like, well, do you actually have a quality control component to your business that looks at your daily consumables and has a new order of whatever it may be, Rio Coco, Grodan? I guess Grodan's a pretty sterile substrate, but these other cocoa core or soil-based substrates, they bring in a lot of other activities. Or also too, for a grower's perspective, they are expecting to get something that is consistent batch to batch. And no different than the cannabis that people put out. A lot of the soil substrates, as an example for this talk, there's a ton of inconsistency. So if the grower has some kind of strict regimen that they're working on nutritionally, and all of a sudden their substrate is, let's say it's hot or higher in a active EC or some kind of material like that, it totally throws off their whole game. So in Canada, their quality control departments and regulatory internal agencies are significantly overstaffed. Not overstaffed, they're staffed 3x or 4x of what you see in the States. And you have people that they're dedicated to this. And you generally have like a compliance officer in an organization, but they're mostly in an office somewhere. They're working with attorneys and all the other stuff that's going on in the regulatory agency. But you really need someone in Canada, specifically they've done a good job of this, someone on the ground level checking quality of your input materials coming. And you just don't see that a lot. Generally because of the GMP guidelines as well, you'll have clean intake receiving, and then there's a quarantine room, and then it goes past, once it passes quarantine, then the cultivation team can use said product. And then there's generally a dirty, dedicated space where you see a lot of, in the US designs, and they're getting a lot better every day, but you see a lot of commingling and cross-contamination components. So I think it's really valid, and it's something that the US, in my opinion, needs to step up on if they're going to be creating a consistent and high-quality product. And it's a nice, well, it's not nice, but one of the challenges is now, let's say you got a big batch of something and it doesn't meet your quality control spec that you paid for or what your expectation was. Now you have a problem because that needed to go back to Sri Lanka or wherever it was coming from, and now you need a replacement. So logistically, from a supply chain and procurement standpoint, having that quality control component involves lots of layers of like plan Bs and backups and stock inventory. So a lot of people don't have the physical space in the smaller, medium-sized cultivation facilities because they already maximize what they have. But these larger operators at like industrial scale, where you start talking about 500,000 or 1 million square feet, they generally do, and they're generally planning for it. But it's a great question, and it's something that needs to be elevated in the U.S. operations.
All right, guys. Well, I think it's 10:30, and really appreciate you guys serving on this panel here. Hope everyone
Thank you
enjoyed
so
it.
much.
And really quickly, a number of you already gave us some exercises.
Thanks a lot.
And